chronic obsessive-compulsive personality.
Why can't I breathe?
History very much used to be a history from above. It was about the landed classes, the ruling elites, the organisation and the hierarchies of society. Increasingly, historians have begun to look at the underbelly of history, the lower history, the history of social classes, of cultures, history from the bottom up rather than from the top down. I'm Matthew Worley, and I'm interested in youth as a formative moment in people's lives, and also in youth cultures as contested spaces and learning spaces, really, which people can use in different ways. They can just be good fun, but they can also be very kind of important in developing people's identity and their understanding of the world around them. I'm looking at the period after punk, late 1970s, 1980s, and to see if young people were using youth culture as a space in order to articulate, explore their politics, cultural expression, those kind of things. Punk really emerges in 1976, a year that's known as embodying the sense of crisis and decline that characterises the 1970s. And I'm interested in it up until 1984, because right from the outset, 1984 seems to loom as this moment, this Orwellian moment that punk is heading towards, from the No Future of Johnny Rotten's God Save the Queen, through the Clash's 1977, in which they count down to 1984, on into the 1980s, where bands like Crass begin to see 1984 and Margaret Thatcher as being the embodiment of some Orwellian big mother state.
Right, 75, 76, definitely grey and monochrome. We had a Labour government at the time, I think. I wasn't into politics at all. To me, they were a bunch of tossers. It had nothing to do with me. There was strikes, there was power cuts and all this sort of stuff. I mean, just dreadful. Everything was bleak. The fashion, if you could call it that, was just awful. And so everyone was desperately trying to find something. We didn't know it at the time, but we were all trying to find something, you know, to click into. Now, I just remember seeing the Clash, and that changed everything completely, because it was just like, in your face. They all looked 10 feet tall. Paul Simon looked like a super god or something with his bass down, and it's there banging out this stuff. And I looked around, and the audience weren't, as you see pictures of punk rock with all the Mohicans and everything's neat and tidy. It was just like a mishmash of people wearing this mishmash of clothes. And suddenly I thought, I just feel old-fashioned. There's something going on here, and I don't know why, but I want a part of it. And it's literally that to everything. And I was like, because of the background of the members of Crass, you know, I mean, none of us were musicians for a start. And the sound that came out didn't sound anything like I thought a punk band should sound like. You know, well, where's the deep sort of pumping bass like the Clash have or something? We didn't have that. But what we had was this sort of unique sound. But it seemed to work really well against whatever band we played with. I always felt, somehow in a quirky way, this is working, so I was never ashamed of it.
Crass were really the band that took anarchy seriously. Anarchy had always been this term that had been associated with punk from the outset because of anarchy in the UK and the slogans that were put on the clothes designed by McLaren and Westwood in London. But Crass took it a step further. They began to develop a coherent ideological position based around a kind of DIY anarchism that comprised various influences that drew from the 60s counterculture, from the Beats, from existentialism, bits of nihilism, lots of different things coming together and filtered through a punk context.
Down now from your cross, down now from your papal heights, from that churlish suicide, petulant child, down from those pious heights, royal flag bearer, goat, Billy, I vomit for you, forgive, shit he forgives, he hangs in crucified delight, nailed to the extent of his vision, his cross, his manhood, violence, guilt, sin.
Firstly, we would try, you know, not to go I, sort of the ego thing. That's why, you know, the all wearing black anonymity thing because we didn't want a front person. We wanted it to be as global or national as possible and to let other people in. You know, Eve Libertine definitely had something to say about the sexist nature of punk or whatever. I mean, to be fair, you know, it is true. At first I was miffed because I wasn't, you know, invited to be on this bloody record. And I was like, hang on, I'm the lead singer and I started a band with Penn sort of thing. But then Penn said, well look, you know, David Bowie would have done the same thing. And I was like, actually you're right there, because what people are expecting is another boot boy, yobby sort of thing to come out. And what they get is, to put it in their terms, a bunch of birds talking about love. It's like fantastic, I love that.
Everything that came out of punk tended to position itself in opposition to something else, deliberately, consciously so. And then when punk is up and running, people position themselves against punk, which is obviously quite a punk thing to do. So a band like the Young Marble Giants played quietly because everybody else was playing noisily. A band like Orange Juice were deliberately articulate in what they were saying, so their songs were very kind of wordy. So even when punk doesn't sound like punk, you can see a kind of punk germ within it because it is consciously trying to be something else.
The pattern of rioting gradually intensified with mounting anger.
In a funny way, Crass, we always saw ourselves as like an information bureau. So by giving out the C&D stuff, these kids of like 14, 15, 16, they'd never heard of it, they'd never seen it. What is it? We don't, but got interested. Then it all sort of built up.
It wasn't just buying a record, it was like buying a communique, a newspaper.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a whole range of mediums being used, the films at the gigs.
Absolutely. Well, that's the whole thing, because we thought, you know, our way of thinking was like, okay, you can't hear the lyrics because I'm screaming and all this sort of stuff, and it's bang, crash, bang, wallop, but maybe you'll understand the imagery, or maybe you'll understand the written word. And yeah, we've got all this paper, we've got all this space, so let's put something meaningful on it. So that's what we did, and gave out leaflets, get the information out, let people know, you know, and the audience would come to Crass gigs with their own leaflets. Steve, is it all right if we hand out these? Let's have a look. Oh, know your rights, and if you get arrested, definitely. What to do if someone's having a heart attack. And it was all fantastic, because it was a whole melting pot. And the funny thing is that Crass gigs, you know, yeah, it was a complete barrage of visuals and the sound and everything. But people came away from it with maybe some sort of memory of something, and I'm like, oh my God, that sort of makes sense, you know. And maybe 20 years down the line.
Crass's story is very important, but it's not one that you'll usually find in the traditional or popular narratives of punk, which tend either to finish in 1978 or move seamlessly into something like New Romanticism and another youth fad. And yet Crass were a band that sold over 1 million records, who inspired an activist movement that linked up to things like the peace movement, the anti-war movement, animal rights activism, and various other challenges to the emergence of Thatcherism at the time. So this is important because it cuts against the idea of history being this linear, smooth unfolding of time, and that passages of history are always complicated, they're always messy, they're always contested, and punk was particularly messy and contested. And what was important for it was it opened up a space that for a brief moment of time you heard these voices. They might have contradicted each other, they might have undermined each other, but ultimately they had something to say, and they were voices that you don't often hear in your traditional historical accounts.
Cause I fucking know.